It doesn't have to do with the length of the track. It doesn't have to do with the speed of the track. It has to do with the duration and frequency of what we would call stress zones versus relax zones. New members tell me, well, how fast am I going to go? We don't look at the speedo. The straightaway is pretty easy. Anybody can hold the wheel straight and hold the gas flat. That's when we tighten our belts, talk on the radio, check our gauges. It's the brake zone, the turn in, hitting the apex, getting the power down in your hands straight. Once your hands are straight and you're full throttle again, you're back in one of those rest zones. So getting that frequency right was important.
Hi, everybody. This is Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. Great to have you back for another episode, and today we're going inside a very exclusive corner of the car culture. Now, maybe you've dreamed of owning a really high-end sports car like a Porsche 911 GT3 or a McLaren P1 GTR, and some of you might be lucky enough to be in that club, but there's sort of a catch to having that kind of machine in your possession, which is that there's only one place to really open it up without getting arrested, right? And that's the track. And this is why private motorsport clubs have become the next big thing. There are now tracks around the country where members can drive at high speed, get professional coaching, and find out what their cars were built to do. And my guest today is going to tell you all about it. Aaron Weiss is president of the Concours Club in Miami, Florida. It's a state-of-the-art facility with a world-class circuit, but there's so much more to it than that, as you'll see. Aaron was bitten by the sports car bug as a kid, and he spent his career trackside. So he's got great insights into a world that few of us get the chance to see, what he calls the motorsport country club experience. Before we get started, I just want to mention that if you enjoy the podcast, there are a few ways for you to support the show. Leave me 5 stars and a quick review wherever you listen, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever. Also, share the show with your friends. And finally, you can be a patron by going to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage. You can give as little as $2 or a higher amount of your choice. And thank you to those of you who've already become patrons. I appreciate it. And now, my interview with Aaron Weiss, right here on Horsepower Heritage. Aaron, I have to tell you that it must be great to be in your office, and when you want to take a break, you just step outside and watch some of the most amazing cars in the world flying around the track.
I had a comment the other day when a friend of mine said, hey, do you want to come to this car show? And I said to him, I don't go to car shows anymore. I just go to my parking lot. I went outside last week after a business meeting, and I had a bunch of members on site, and I walked outside, and the first thing I saw in front of Verge, which is our member restaurant and lounge, was 4 brand new Ferrari Daytona SP3s. 4 of them. I'm not sure that anywhere other than the Ferrari factory that there are 4 sitting next to each other. So you said it exactly right. And I believe strongly that watching cars sit still is really cool. I could stand around, I could stare at every line on that car all day, but until you really hear them sing, you haven't got the full experience. So having the course on site and having the ability to put those kind of cars out there, just for fun, it's not always about competition. Sometimes it's just for fun and exploring. So you're right. It's pretty spectacular. I mean, even just walking through our car storage bay is one of the most spectacular collections I've ever seen. The diversity amongst what our members collect is always something that shocks me. There's no set archetype.
I'm glad you said that. One of my favorite things when I go to any track is when I have access is to walk through the paddock, because you really get a sense of what it takes to prep a car, the teamwork that's going on. Sometimes you hear some funny conversations with the mechanics and the drivers and the owners, and then when they're warming the cars up, when they're getting the cars to operating temperature, and just those final things before they go out for their session. I really like that. It brings everything to life.
Yeah, I tend to get emotional at racetracks in the morning.
You love the smell of petrol in the morning, right?
I love the smell of fuel. I love the energy of the mornings. I love that kind of like slight calm before the mayhem starts. I love the first couple motors that fire up in the morning. I love the sound of those things being revved in the paddock. unloaded, just zinging up to build temperatures up. I love the sound of air guns. I think I've found the right career.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And we're going to get into all of that, kind of your journey to the Concours Club. But so you're the president of the organization. This is a very exclusive private racetrack facility, and you're outside Miami. You're Metro Miami, let's say. And I know you've heard my show, so I like to delve into some historical topics. But
Me too.
in doing my research, so there's some interesting stuff about Opelika, Florida, which is where you're located, the Miami Opelika Executive Airport. So this is what I learned, and this might not be news to you, but so the original name was Opatisha Wakalapa, which is Seminole for island in the swamp.
Oh.
And this is a great tie-in. The city and the airport were founded by, of all people, Glenn Curtis, right? Pilot license #1 in the United States. And probably a guy after our hearts. He built his first motorcycles very early, including a V8 powered motorcycle.
Yeah.
And
he was from Western New York.
Yes, right. Yeah. But it was also a Curtiss airplane was the first airplane to make a carrier takeoff and then later a landing. They built a makeshift flight deck on a ship and proved the concept. And then he was a major real estate developer in the Miami area. So I just think that whole story, the adventurism and the entrepreneurship.
And I love that story and how that story ties in and equates to so many of our current members who are, the archetype of somebody who's from that northeastern area or more of a traditional city, who's successful in a business, who's, an entrepreneur who exits a successful business and then relocates to Miami and becomes a real estate developer is still something that we see happening on a daily basis. This is like a very common archetype for new members I have who, I exited my tech company and I moved to Miami. And now what are you doing now? Well, I'm playing with race cars and I'm flying planes and I'm doing some real estate development. It's incredible how the times change and the people do not.
Right. And that whole process of transplantation from the Northeast to Florida, very interesting. It's kind of a unique cultural phenomenon in the United States in terms of like how we've migrated and how we've established these different sort of centers for things in the United States. And Miami and South Florida has always been really a center for motorsport. I mean, look at Daytona, right? From very early days, they were trying to go fast there. And of course, Sebring and so great history there. Tell us about how the Concours Club came to be.
So, as motorsports world has evolved, it very typically historically was a spectator sport back in the day. It was incredibly high risk and not everybody was willing to take those risks. And it was somewhat of a spectacle. And I think a lot of people attended and grew up with a passion for spectating. As the world started to change, and I give a large amount of credit to automotive engineers, when daily driven street cars started to get more and more and more capable, people who had spent a life sitting in the grandstand said, hey, you know what? I'd really love to try that. And that kind of ushered in the start of the participant world. There was always a route. You could always go to a Skip Barber and rent a race car and do something like that. And it was feasible. I came up through a traditional system like that, but there was a whole group of people who just wanted to try it in something that they were driving every day. Back in, I would say, let's go back 70s, 80s, there was only 2 or 3 models of car that you could successfully drive to the track and have a really good chance of making it home. I think that's probably why guys like you and I became such Porsche guys, because that was one of the key brands. And there was something about the robustness and the utility of them that just seemed more accessible than some of the other exotics. But I think when the rest of the auto industry caught up and there became this pattern for usage, that became a legitimate segment of our business. And, when that happened, I was at the time working at a very traditional racetrack. We sold tickets and hot dogs and beer and we ran major events. But we had all this excess time when the course wasn't in use And then we started servicing the kind of members who said, hey, I'm a successful doctor. I have a Porsche Turbo. I know I shouldn't be driving it like this on the street. I've always been curious what's it capable of on the track. And I think that ushered in the era of participant-based sport. And I think from there, without getting too deep in the minutia, it started a snowball effect that ended with the Motorsport Country Club, which is where we are today. Now, our club is much different than any of the others or any of our predecessors, for a variety of reasons. One, I think it's the sum of wisdom. I think back about some of the early guys who started the first motorsports country clubs, and what that pitch must have been like walking into a bank or a group of potential investors and trying to explain this business model of what I was going to do. And, thank God those guys did it. And thank God they were successful to a large degree. But part of the drive on that was that the infrastructure around motorsport and motorsport development hadn't yet caught up with what it was that the market wanted, what the market would bear. So as a very short example, a traditionally designed racetrack has some significant fundamental differences to what we call a motorsports country club. And those are really everything from site plan to size to how we design certain elements and where we put them. But you could take it one step further, which our owner and founder, Neil Gahani, certainly did. And he said, well, the first part of is location. The location drives that kind of usage. And typically, an amateur participant in motorsport doesn't have the time to dedicate that a professional does. So short duration usage becomes something of interest. But short duration usage and sites that are long ways from city cores do not match. But I think in the early days, people who wanted to develop these business models hired track designers, and track designers very typically were designing the standard racetrack and said, I need 500 acres. I need 700 acres. And by their very nature, you ended up 2.5, 3, 4 hours from the city core. Our, I think, impetus for being so different was Neil's understanding that there is a place in this world for that short duration usage and to drive the social side of a club that is driven largely by convenience as much as anything else. So he was very firm that we needed to find a site that was no more than 30 minutes from the major city core. And in finding this site, it really changed everything. And that manifests in the day-to-day here. I mean, I believe we're the only motorsport country club where the restaurant operates hours completely independently of the course. And it's not uncommon that people will come out here just to park a cool car in the parking lot, have a car wash, and have lunch with their buddies. Which in the very traditional model, if you're 2.5, 3 hours from the city, you're just not going to dedicate the time to go out there for that type of usage. Unless you're going out there to spend a whole day or multiple days, you probably don't have that time to dedicate.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many racetracks in the early days were basically, they were farmland that somebody decided to cut a short oval on, and that's kind of how it developed, especially with motorcycle racing. You also touched on something else in terms of business model, which is that it is hard to make money in motorsport. It's hard to operate a track in the black, in the green. So I think we're at a very unique time in history where, like you said, the market will support this right now. And it probably hasn't been like this since the late teens and early 20s. When a lot of board tracks sprang up around the country, but they didn't last too long. So longevity is key, right?
Yeah. Well, we had a board track not far from here in Miami, but, it was one of the shortest lived ones ever. I don't know. You're a historian, as am I. And, to that end, this is sitting on my desk as my casual read, The History of America's Speedways. So I love this history and stuff as well. I didn't realize that the biggest first board track built in South Florida was actually torn up by the Great Hurricane. It only operated for about 6 to 9 months before the hurricane surprised everybody and destroyed the facility.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. Out here in California, we had the Culver City Speedway, and we also had the Beverly Hills Speedway, which I think only operated for, I want to say 3 to 4 years. Yeah. And then they realized this land is way too valuable to dedicate it to a racetrack. But one of the first investors in the Beverly Hills Speedway was Cecil B. DeMille. of all people. Yeah, the big movie producer
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and director, and Harry A. Miller tested his cars at the Beverly Hills Speedway.
Incredible. You
So
wonder the net value of what sits on that land today. And I think it goes circles back to your point that it isn't easy to make a racetrack pay today. It wasn't easy then.
no,
Um,
but you're taking a holistic approach. It's not just about the racing. You've incorporated a lot of hospitality. Give me some examples of how the Concours Club differs in that way.
I think we have a couple of elements that are unique. And I think another thing to talk about is, much like fine wine or wonderful cars, to a large degree, the more successful they are is often dictated by how well they're targeted at the environment in which they're living in. So I don't think there is one country club racetrack business model that works for everybody. I think every market is unique. And those of us who've been successful have adapted our business models to meet that market. So yes, we do have a lot of social attendees, and a lot of that is facilitated by a tremendous level of hospitality. I wasn't lacking as a child. My father was fairly well off. I did go to a country club as a kid, albeit it was a golf club, but I certainly understood that there was more than just golf at that club. There was a social side. There was the community side. I had friends there. I had friends who were kids of other members there, and I understood that cultural side. So that cultural side really has its own unique draw and offers something to members. Particularly, we had a tailwind of migration into Miami. So one of the ways, if you move to a new city, you've relocated, you've exited your business, you're working remotely, you want to get tied into a social network. The concept of joining a club of like-minded people was not something new to us. It was well timed. And because our location allows for that social attendance, we've leaned in with a whole series of programs that are socially targeted. I mean, we have a celebrity chef. We have a full-time master sommelier. We host a whole series of programs that have very little to do with motorsport. Yes, there's always some sort of automobilia tie-in just because it's my pension and my passion. But typically we have large dinners and events and just great places for people to meet people socially. Now, once you come out here and you experience our level of service and you engage socially, typically the next step is if you're passionate about something, it's often something that you want to share with your friends. So entertainment in what we would call a boutique environment, which is, let's say, for definition's sake, between 5 and 25 people with a direct member affiliation. That's everything from a member saying, I have a bunch of friends I play golf with. I want to let them try a race car, to I have a family reunion coming, to I'm part of a YPO group and I'd like my business meeting here, to I'd like to host a business meeting for my board of directors. We started and we are consistently executing a huge amount of those events in which we leverage our food and beverage program. We have one of the best driver education programs in the world. I'm incredibly proud of what we've achieved there, leveraging great people and great technology, but we have a very open and well-defined environment where you can bring in 4, 5, 6, 10 of your friends who've never been in a car, and we can get you a motorsport experience in a very safe but short attention span manner. And those kind of events have tied in a variety of things. I think those events tie some degree of motorsport, some degree of food and beverage, and usually another element that will tie in there, be it some music or be it art or being something other cultural element. And when you can capture all of those things, I think the momentum shows, the passion shows. So what really differentiates from us is our location drives a different kind of utilization, and we're doing a huge amount of social entertainment that sometimes does and sometimes does not include time on the course itself.
One of the coolest things I saw that you did was a pop-up swimming pool just next to one of the turns on the track, like right there.
So that's actually, we do that once a year. When F1 came to Miami, I think it was a game changer for the whole city. It was like the last domino. The city always had this great motorsport history that you and I discussed. It always had a huge Latin American influence. And as we know, some of the best race car drivers in the world have come from South America for generations, since the beginning of racing. There was always this passion. Whereas I think in the Midwest and California, your first taste of motorsport was typically an oval race, be that on dirt, be it motorcycles, be it on a board track. That was very common. I think South Florida always kind of had more of a road racing, circuit racing culture because of that influence from the South Americans. Then when you mixed in all the Europeans moving here now and the city becoming so much more international, and then the urbanites from the Northeast and the Midwest came this way as well, you just created this incredible melting pot. And the final straw was the addition of F1. So at F1, we build a large suite for our members right inside turn 3. And it's actually on that deck where we put in the swimming pool you mentioned. I don't ever have to explain to a single one of my members why you would put a swimming pool next to the guardrail at an F1 race. And frankly, if people don't understand it at all, I'm very happy to do my best to explain it. But I'm also completely cognizant that they're probably just not Concours Club kind of people.
No, it makes perfect sense to me.
Exactly.
I would definitely post up there for a little while during a race.
Yeah, it's a good time there. We had one of our members. He was racing in the Porsche support race, the Porsche Cup, and I told him, hey, if you win the race, you have to come do a Monaco style dip into the pool if you win. And he had a bit of a bumpy season and hadn't been doing great. Had some mechanicals and whatnot, and he had the race of his life. Had a great drive and a little bit of luck, which we all know is required. And he ended up winning the race. And he came to the suite and said, I'm a man of my word. I'm here in full driving suit, and did the plunge in our pool. I think it was one of my favorite F1 moments, watching our member jump in the pool. And then his nephew jumped in with him. It was just a great time. At the end of the day, on site at F1, traveling, whatever we're doing, we're creating experiences for our members. And all of those little touch points are what cumulatively creates a great experience. So having a pool that you can plunge in after winning a Porsche Cup race just made perfect sense to me.
Yeah. Makes for a good photo op too.
It sure did.
Aaron, clearly you're passionate about business, but where does this car fascination come from?
Yeah, I just always loved mechanical advantage and motion. Cars, bicycles, roller skates, even just running. I think some degree of it is probably based on a case of ADHD that I feel blessed with and have managed to weaponize. But I think my earliest car love, I hear the stories from my parents that I was a very difficult baby, but as soon as they put me in the car, I would calm down. I don't remember that. My earliest memories, and I give a lot of credit to one of my uncles. Both of my uncles were car guys. My dad liked a nice car, but he wasn't really a car guy. But I had an uncle who lived fairly close by, who was a fairly successful surgeon, pretty well-known guy, and loved Porsches. And he always had the latest, greatest Porsches. And I even remember as a kid going to visit them on the weekends, showing up at the house, and he would give me the phone book. And I would run through the house to his barn where he had a 356 Porsche. And I would sit on the phone book, couldn't reach the pedals all day long with a hand on the steering wheel and just going through the gears. There was just something about the mechanics of that I absolutely loved. So I just loved cars. As soon as I started consuming media, kind of missed the whole world of car magazines. A huge part of my life was the day that the new car driver would show up, or when Auto Week was there, or when Sports Car International Illustrated. That was amazing. And just having that kind of tactile thing to touch and see, because I grew up in New Jersey. You didn't see the kind of cars on a daily basis that you see down in South Florida or in LA or some of the other urban areas. If you saw a Porsche Turbo, you stopped everything you were doing, and that was, that made your day. So I came of the love of cars that way. I also was a skier, and I raced skis and I raced bicycles, and I was always just on a quest to move faster than my feet alone could take me. I was always fascinated by the mechanical side of it. But the racetrack side of it really came in my first job in the industry. I was working for a company that was manufacturing exotic sports cars in the hills of Georgia. It was called Panos. Right? Exactly
Yeah.
Right. And we had this little car, and it was really cool, and it had some great benefits. It also had some shortcomings. And as we struggled to try and move these cars into the market as an unknown brand, the concept of win on Sunday, sell on Monday came up. And by sheer luck and timing, I think there was a local racetrack that was available for sale and right around the corner from where we were building the cars. Years later, I think of the irony that it was probably one of the best racetracks in North America and still one of my favorites, Road Atlanta. So the company purchased Road Atlanta, and we started the process of running some driving school programs and building some cars for that program. And I got to run through the racing school at Panos. And I tell people, and I believe it, I remember about halfway through day one of the 3-day school, I had a moment of clarity where I realized that street cars were just a great way to get to and from the track, but it was all about race cars. And, I was guilty of what every car guy is guilty of. I've made some ill-advised decisions before I had a race license, tried some stuff on the streets that I probably shouldn't have survived. Thank God I was before the era where there was social media and persistence of that media. I'd probably be unemployable to this day for some of the stunts and shenanigans. But when I tasted, a controlled environment in a racetrack, I was absolutely hooked. But it was interesting that I was already past the age where anybody was going to pay me to drive a car, nor do I frankly have that kind of talent. But I learned that this is a skill that can be acquired through enough persistence and practice. But having been a guy who grew up around the country club and then coming up as the guy who's been treated like you're the AAA ball player trying to make it to the majors, I very quickly saw there was a huge delta in this hobby. There was no, luxury customer environment to learn how to participate in motorsport in a safe way. And I think that was a seed that was planted fairly early in my career and something that I always kind of kept an eye on, and a large driver for where I ended up, where I am today.
You really, you made me laugh inside because talking about doing stupid stuff on the street when you're a kid. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. And all I'll say is it's amazing how much air you can catch in a 1985 Ford Escort if you really try.
The air is the fun part. It's usually the landing that's a little difficult in those.
The landing can be kind of hairy. Yeah. Yeah. Been there, done that.
I think the only reason we're here talking about it is because back then a good sports car had 125 horsepower. Sometimes It scares me when I think about what these young kids have access to today. They're buying cars that are 400, 500, 600 horsepower and driving them. I often say when members come in or potential members come in and they have teenagers and looking at the club and they say, my teenage son, daughter is very interested in motorsport. I know they like playing with cars. I always remind them that I believe that every car person has a certain amount of speed inside. It's going to come out somewhere.
Yeah.
If you steer them to the right place.
Yeah. And as an aside, I think one of the things we could really do in this country is improve driver education. So people take it a lot more seriously and they're more proficient. I see people demonstrating a total lack of skill on the road on a daily basis. And it's worse than it's ever been. I'm sure that phones play a part in that. Screens play a part in that. Screens in the car, that is. And also cars are so good now that it almost makes up for that lack of skill in some ways.
I see it as well, and it really scares me. And it's actually one of my personal initiatives and pet peeves. I have a fairly significant and constantly growing and changing teenage driving program that we launched here. All of our memberships are for the whole family. That's part of being in a club. So, if a member has teenagers, I ask them right away, let them come through our program. And I think you said it. It's the screens both inside and out. It's a reliance on these systems that are in the cars, which as a race driver, I can tell you, traction control helps, but it doesn't defy physics. All it does is it pushes the envelope to a point where when the physics take over, the results are catastrophic. I mean, I've spun out and snowbanked a car before. If I had been going 4 times the speed when that happened, we probably wouldn't be here having the discussion today. So I think that, and I think the other issue is that there is so much media now and so much to learn and focus on. And I think that the phones have provided kids an outlet of freedom. For you and I, the day you got your driver's license was freedom. So your willingness to focus time and energy and attention to get that license the first day you had it was super important. It was my whole social life, the ability to get out. But now that so much of your social life is on the phone, the motivation to get out and drive and the access to Uber and rideshare means that, when I meet kids who are of age to have a driver's license and haven't achieved one yet, I'm dumbfounded. For me, that's just so foreign. I was literally the first guy in line the day of my birthday, ready to go. And if I could have cheated and found a way to get it a year early, you bet I would have. So I think they're kind of phoning it in instead of really caring and understanding. It becomes less of a rite of passage than it was. And with the school systems and everything else going on, it's really pretty scary. We teach in our teenage driving program a whole series of things beyond just traffic lights and usage. I mean, we start with that. That's great. I'm amazed how many kids come in here and you go through the car internally and say, what does that button do? What does that button? They have no idea what all the systems are. They know what ABS is. They know the term ABS and it has something to do with stopping the car, but they have no idea how that functions, how to be trained on that, where the limitations are. We teach all that. You'd be amazed how many kids have no idea what to do when they get pulled over by a police officer the first time. What to do when you get a flat tire. Like all these things are going to happen. So we're constantly changing that program and expanding and trying to add those kind of elements to make it enhanced. We're also going to actually be offering that for the first time ever this coming summer to non-members through a couple of connections we have at local schools. I think it's that important to the whole of society that this is one of those elements where it's nice to be a private member club, but I think it's a social service to offer that to others as well.
Good to hear. Yeah, very important. And you talked about when we were young and that freedom associated with getting your license. And I mean, I remember Friday nights were for cruising the boulevard, right? You get your friends, load up the car, and around about sunset, the street would load up with a lot of cool cars and some not so cool, but full of kids going slow. Usually some stoplight Grand Prix happened here and there.
Yeah.
And pretty soon parking lots along the boulevard would start to fill up with different car clubs. You know, there were the Camaro guys and there were the pickup truck guys. And I remember even an AMC club, you know, the parking lot was full of gremlins and pacers.
Yeah.
Which this is, mind you,
some people need to go their own way.
Yeah. And mind you, for me, this is in the 80s. So by that time they were really uncool. But yeah, that was fun. And we would do that from about, I don't know, 6:30 in the evening and until well after midnight, you know, before everybody went home. It was a lot of fun. And we didn't for a single second worry about who's trying to text me because it didn't exist. I mean, different era, right? It's amazing.
I would say the idea of freedom these days is buy yourself a vintage car. Do not install Bluetooth.
Right. Yeah. I don't have it in my cars, in my vintage cars, and I don't really need it. If I need it, I'll just throw my earbuds in.
You don't want it.
No, neither do I. And Aaron, it's interesting. Specifically, you keyed into performance cars very early. It wasn't a fascination necessarily with cars in general, although you had a mechanical interest, but you really focused on performance cars early, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, sports cars for sure.
Yeah.
Sports cars always did it for me. Speed always did it for me. Probably no surprise. I was skiing and I was bicycle racing and doing that kind of stuff. And then as I, always read in the back of Auto Week, the stats, right? I'm sorry, the back of Car and Driver, that table of stats was the Bible pre-internet. So I think watching those performance stats and measuring cars based on a set of repeatable metrics, obviously the sports car stuff always shined. And I think if you're in a world where all your goals are aspirational anyway, why not shoot for a Countach? Who wants a Honda Civic?
Yeah, absolutely. Your career took you through a series of motorsport management jobs, right? Up in the Northeast, Moroso Motorsports Park, I think. And
Moroso, that was actually down here in Palm Beach.
Okay.
All right. In northern Palm Beach, though, which is, significantly different market than where we are today. But then, yes, I did go up north. I did a stint up at Monticello Motor Club in the Catskills, which is an absolutely beautiful club and a gorgeous track in one of the most beautiful places in the world, but much different than here in that, so few of the members of the club lived within, let's say, a 50-mile radius of the club, that it was a completely different usage. It was a very traditional usage for a motorsports country club compared to here, where I have a huge amount of members who live, 25, 30-minute drives away, very common.
Yeah. We talked about the hospitality aspect of the Concours Club, but I'm really curious about the track design because the way you guys have done it, it's got a large number of configurations depending on the event, the day, the class of vehicle that's on the track. Tell me about that.
So I think modern track design is significantly different than it was historically. And it's largely driven by the thing that is the most important thing to me. First and foremost, above and beyond anything, is safety. I don't have, a Formula One track is designed to get the 20 best drivers in the world as close to as many grandstand seats as possible and make an exciting show. That's the exact opposite of a motorsport country club. My goal is to entertain members and their guests and get them home as safely as possible. So modern track design, I think, requires a much different design ethos. Now, thankfully for us, there is an international standard, and that international standard is opened and published. And if you follow the international standard, you can achieve some incredible things right there. Now, it isn't widely adopted in North America because the sanctioning body isn't required to run as it is in Europe, but that doesn't mean it's not best practice, and it doesn't mean the data isn't out there. So we also, having started racing in vintage cars and watched cars develop and change, and I spent a small stint in 2008-9 in the simulator business, and I understood the digital side of it and the simulator side. And, I liken it to this. We used to joke around when the simulators first came out that someday the simulators were going to evolve to the point where the controls felt more accurate to the car. And then the exact opposite happened. The cars have become so digital that they evolved to the point where a lot of that tactile feel that we got from vintage cars is gone, and they're much more numb, and they have a lot more systems in place. But because of that, the driving technique changed as well. We really looked long and hard at what the evolution and changes were in those driving techniques, and wanted to build a course that had at least a few of the elements of the most critical modern driving techniques. I said, look, most of the drivers who are here are going to be people who've spent their careers to date in business, and they're later in life starting to learn, or they're the sons and daughters of members who haven't had the chance to get on racetracks. There's some incredible racetracks in this country, but if you looked at the modern standard, you could never build them again. They just don't meet reasonable safety standards. So we created a course that's fun and exciting, and it has something that's so hard to quantify. It's called flow. Every race driver in the world will tell you if a track they've driven has flow or it doesn't. But we couldn't find a single track designer who could quantify what that was. I think we cracked that nut, and we cracked it working through. So we use a track designer named Alan Wilson, who was a very traditional track designer, and he had a young man working for him named Bryce Englehart. And I give Bryce a ton of credit for thinking outside the box, utilizing simulators, finding new ways to do things. And I think together we put together a course that has all of the elements you need to learn the basics of a course, and it has flow. And how do you describe to somebody who doesn't drive a lot what has flow? So there are courses where your team calls you on the radio and says, your session is over. Come on into the pits. And the first thing you think is, thank God I survived. Or, oh my God, I'm so tired. That's over. There are other tracks where they call and say, okay, your session's over. Come to the box right now. And you want to pretend like your radio didn't work because you just want one more lap or two more laps. That's when you're on a track that has flow. And I think that's what we've achieved. And without, spoiling the secret sauce, I think it's quite simple when you distill it down. It doesn't have to do with the length of the track. It doesn't have to do with the speed of the track. It has to do with the duration and frequency of what we would call stress zones versus relax zones. New members tell me, well, how fast am I going to go? We don't look at the speedo. The straightaway is pretty easy. Anybody can hold the wheel straight and hold the gas flat. That's when we tighten our belts, talk on the radio, check our gauges. It's the brake zone, the turn in, hitting the apex, getting the power down in your hands straight. Once your hands are straight and you're full throttle again, you're back in one of those rest zones. So getting that frequency right was important. Now, in terms of the configurations, it's a really interesting question. That's a balance between driving and the operational side of the business. Typically, for most member days, I run the same configuration. And I do that because if you want to measure your performance, you have to have a limited set of variables. So if I were to change the configuration every day and you were to come out here today and I'm running a B configuration and your last benchmark lap time or the best benchmark lap time of the fastest member in the car you're driving was on the A configuration, you do lose that correlate. Now, that said, we have special events and we also have something really new that we just opened a couple months ago that I think is the next phase of the Concours Club and a real game changer. And that's our automotive events campus. So all of the motorsports country clubs in the world exist on a combination of member activity and non-member activity. I mean, how many press events have you been invited to at random tracks to test drive a car, or marketing efforts of a major manufacturer bring out a new car and they want to bring the existing members? At a traditional, typical racetrack, getting attendees there could be challenging because of the same constraints we just discussed. You're 2.5 hours from the city. So in an environment like ours, you can get a much higher attendance rate and a casual attendee. So we have just opened a Pininfarina design building specifically targeted at non-member automotive events and driving experiences. And from that, we're able to host all sorts of events. So the configurations really come into place with that, because now I can divide the course and I can simultaneously run an entry level or an experience course for non-members on one side of the facility. And interestingly, we've completely bifurcated the activities, albeit the course itself. And when divided, it's completely bifurcated. Members still come in their normal member entrance. They still have their normal paddock. They still have their normal restaurant. They know my service staff. The family is intact. Non-members come in their own entrance, have their own parking area, their own paddock, their own pit lane. So we can simultaneously run a non-member activation along with a member day. And it gives us a lot of unique opportunities and possibilities. But we also realize that there are other ways to use a course on a day-to-day basis that aren't traditional motorsport. And they may not pencil for a traditional racetrack's business model, but for us, they do. A great example of this is Sunday mornings. Every Sunday morning, we run a touring lap program. So we open the restaurant. We've got a great brunch. People bring out cars in their collection that are either too valuable or too dangerous or too risky. And we open the track for low speed driving. Essentially, we keep a speed limit the same as you would drive on the Florida Turnpike. It's a low speed. We double sweep the track to make sure that your valuable exotic isn't getting tire marbles or any kind of chips or something like that. And it's turned into this great social, cultural environment where you bring out your stuff. You get to just drive it through the gearbox and run it. And, I have a 1966 911 that I'd been racing for quite a while. And now I've put it back in street trim, and I forget how nice it is to just drive that car on a Sunday morning with the windows open and just working it through the gearbox. And that is truly a great way to share passion. It's turned into this great program where members bring out a variety of cars that they love. And then the amount of trust, camaraderie, and car swapping. I've gotten to drive an F40. I get to drive a member's Countach. I get to drive a brand new 812 Ferrari. I got to drive a 993 RS. And all these things just happen because we have such a genuine love of the cars, and the guys will bring them out, and it's a member environment, and go hop in. Also, because the speeds are limited and because we're just touring around, I let them bring family members. If you have a child who you want to get involved in motorsport, I'll never forget sitting in the passenger seat of my uncle's first 930 Turbo, watching that boost gauge, waiting.
Oh,
And when that boost hit, it put your head back. I mean, I'll never forget that. So any chance we get to allow a member to share that with somebody in their lives, I think it's that sharing of that passion. Those are the moments that I really cherish.
that turbo lag. You got me with that. That's hilarious.
You just think about that by modern standards.
Oh,
It was
it's
like,
ridiculous.
it's ridiculous. Those cars were virtually undrivable in certain conditions because of it. But, it's the lack of perfection that creates the nuances that we love. I mean, you drive that Countach. I was commenting to somebody the other day, in terms of driving a car, and same as hosting an event, the cumulative experience is 1,000 touch points. And if any one of those touch points is wrong, it can ruin the whole experience. The only outlier is driving the Countach. Every single one of the touch points is terrible, but the cumulative experience is fabulous. How is that? I don't know. Maybe only somebody who owns one could explain that.
I have an idea, a theory about that, and which is that Ferruccio Lamborghini was not interested in motorsport. He didn't care about competition. He just wanted to throw it in Enzo's face. So Enzo had a long run up even before Ferrari was founded, when he was with the
Alpha. Yeah.
He knew, and his designers knew, where things ought to be in a performance car. And Ferruccio just was kind of like, put it together, you know? So
But he really captured a cultural moment and changed the world with what he did.
absolutely. I mean, the one of my favorite Countachs in the world is owned by Simon Kidston, who you may know, a rather well-known European automotive broker, and he has a metallic purple LP400. And
Yeah, early one.
Yeah, and the British number plate on the car is 77 UFO. Perfect.
That is perfect.
I just love it.
Those who know just know.
Yeah,
And it
absolutely.
must have been. It must have been. It still is today. So,
Oh,
sharing in those kind of things is a place where you wouldn't bring that out to a traditional, track day, high performance driving experience club now. Nor would you want to put that out on a public road. Every city's different. Out west, you guys have some beautiful roads in the canyons or whatnot, but that's not a fun car to drive in Miami traffic going straight. So having the opportunity to utilize the course for things like that, we have some new programs coming where I mentioned looking back at that car and driver table of performance. And, we came up with the idea of, I used to think as a kid, whoever gets to drive the car and measure who gets to do the 0 to 60, the 0 to 100 to 0, who gets to do the slalom. So we're going to go ahead and recreate that. We're going to create using portions of the course in a kind of a circuit battery. We're going to create those kind of programs where you can get out there and run your car through the battery and catch those metrics and compare. You just bought the new Artura and you had a 720. You want to know what the difference is? Well, run them back to back and let's look at the numbers. So the ability to utilize the course in ways that are outside of standardly considered motorsport is something else that I think we've kind of set a new bar for.
and another thing I know you're doing is you're leveraging the latest technology for both driver training, almost a virtual driver training. In other words, you don't have to have an instructor in the car, and you're also utilizing telemetry, right? So how does that all work together?
So the impetus started with a very, very fundamental operational need, which was I wanted a course that could operate with agility. Understanding because of our location and having had experiences at prior clubs where, you have 10 drivers registered in the morning, you wake up, you staff the course, it rains. And then your drivers call and say, I don't want to drive in the rain, I'm not coming. You send home all the corner workers and all the operation staff. At noon, the weather clears up and the guys call and go, can I come out in the afternoon? And half your corner workers have already been to the bar or got. So I wanted a system where I wanted all the full-time staff here I needed. And I also wanted to leverage the most modern safety. Putting one of your most critical jobs in the hands of your typically lowest paid employees was always something that just it never settled correctly with me. And having been through the ringer myself and done that time as a corner worker and managed corner workers, it's a pinch point for any track operator. So we started out with the goal of let's create a semi-autonomous digital flagging system. And once you have that technology, you start to realize how much of motorsport administration is really science, which can be automated to some degree. I have more staff in the kitchen here than I do typically running a day on the race course, which is pretty incredible because the high level food preparation is still art. That is not automatable, but on the course it is. So it started out with embracing that. Then it came to wanting to put a driver education system together. This is a conversation that Neil and I had very early on about how important it was for us to create a culture of ongoing education. And being that we're in Miami, we had access to this incredible pool of driving instructors. But I'd been through several scenarios where I've responded to on-course scenes and I've seen coaches, friends of mine in tough situations in the passenger seat of cars. I started my career coaching and getting in the car. When I turned 30, I couldn't do it anymore. I can't sit as a passenger in the car. So there's a local race car driver and one of my personal driving instructors, a guy named Jeff Siegel, who had also seen this need. And I'm not surprised he did. He was a driver coach who was sitting in the right seat with going faster and faster drivers. And he came up with something called a GPX stream system. The GPX stream system essentially takes video and data from the car and it live streams it back to the pit lane to be displayed in an iPad. As soon as I saw this in function, I immediately said, we're going to be the first facility that doesn't do any passenger seat coaching at all. All of our cars are mandated to have this GPX system in. We've embraced it to the point where Jeff's North American GPX warehouse and base is actually on site here. We have a terrific partnership where we pilot, test any of the things he has, anything new he's able to test and run here. We have an open book. I share all the data coming off the cars with him with the goal of improving the system for everybody. And, he and I both had a discussion. It was certainly the kind of thing you might think from a standpoint that I would have said, I need exclusivity. I don't want anybody else to have it. And from a business standpoint, I think that had some value, but I think this is another one of those things where I would rather be known, and part of a legacy could be advancing this kind of technology and how many lives that we can save by taking the driver coaches out of the passenger seat. So that was kind of the impetus. Now, look, knockback effects. We're teaching people a game of millimeters here. In certain series, if you win enough races, they give you reward weight to try and balance it out so that they put weight. If you've got enough reward weight at the end of the season, you have 50, 75 pounds. That's a lot. We're taking driving coaches who weigh 150 to 175 pounds and placing them in and out of the car and then trying to explain to somebody where the brake zone is. It wasn't safe. Not to mention the super top line drivers, particularly those who have successful careers or are still engaged in success, they don't want to get in the passenger seat. So by taking these guys out of the car, it gave me access to an incredible list of driving instructors. I mean, I don't have a driving instructor on my core who I wouldn't use myself as a coach, who I wasn't a prior fan of in racing myself. I mean, I grew up, I raced Hondas for a couple of years, and I had Pierre Kleinubing posters all over my wall from his real-time racing. And now Pierre's here with me 4 or 5 days a week coaching. I have Oz Negri, who I watched take drivers who I knew in SCCA all the way to winning the Truman Award in IMSA, then Grand Am. And now he's one of my coaches. My lead instructor, Rod McLeod, is one of the most phenomenal drivers, teachers, and managers I've ever met. And his mechanical sympathy. This is a guy who started out as a mechanic in Formula One at the highest level. He was a McLaren mechanic back in the 80s before his own driving career. I walked out the other day. We got the call to host an event for Formula E for some influencers. Told 2 of my driving instructors. One was Oliver Askew, who was a Formula E Rookie of the Year for Andretti. And the other was Michael Benyahia, who'd done a lot of Formula E testing. So we have this incredible group. And I think the reason we have them and the reason they're so successful is because we're leveraging the latest, greatest technology. For the safety standpoint of not putting them in the cars and creating the repeatability for our members, as well as, driver coaching used to be a history lesson. You would go out, run, they would watch you from the sideline, they would come back in, they say, I saw this or I saw that, or you would grab a high 8 video out of the car and say, okay, try this, try that. But with the stream system, it's real time. You're not getting a history lesson. You're getting the guy's talking you through the lap. As you're approaching this corner, I want you to stay left. Don't forget to brake it. And we're looking at the brake pressure you're putting in. We're looking at the throttle application. We're looking at the steering position. We can tell you, you're not braking hard enough. You're braking too hard. Turn in smoother, like all of those things. And it has just accelerated the learning curve here. We're running a member, much like any other country club would, there's got to be a member championship, right? So we're running a member championship racing series here in spec cars. We had our penultimate round this past weekend. We had 1.2 seconds from pole position to the last driver. And some of those guys, the guy who was on the pole position is 15, and he learned to drive a car here through our program. And some of the guys who were in the grid had been racing for 25 to 30 years. So to have that fan of experience, but have a driver education program that so quickly gets those guys on par has been amazing. And I give a lot of credit to our members who embrace the culture of ongoing education. I have members who are booking a coach, 95% of the time they're driving out here. Whereas other clubs, it's become a cultural thing to get to the point where you don't, it's some sort of a stigma to have a green badge or have a coach working with you. Here, I think we're much closer to like the Aspen Ski School, where people who possess a lot of skills are actually scheduling their time based on the coach or instructor that's available for them to use, because that relationship is part of the experience. So I think all of that starts with giving the guys the technology they need to be comfortable to coach in that way and establish those personal relationships. And that's everything from the circuit side to the in-car to the cars themselves, the reliability of the cars.
Have you found that drivers who have had in-car coaching now prefer the new model? Or, I mean, what's the
100%.
comparison? Really?
They typically start out saying, well, when I was in this program, I felt really comfortable with this person here or that person there. And I say, I understand, please try it. Then they'll come back after a session or two and say, I can't believe that I couldn't hear the guy. He was yelling at me. He said, try this. I had to look over. I lost the mirror for 1 second. He's trying to give me some obscure hand signal. And, when you're in the car, the emotion's there, the fear is there. It elevates, even if you're talking on it calm. As an instructor, your tones are elevated if you're sitting in the car with them. It's incredible how useful it is to have a calming voice from above when you're in that car. And when the coaches are in the pit lane, it really helps. There are also other knockback effects. When you're first starting out there, one of the things that gives people anxiety is traffic. I don't want to hold somebody else up. I don't want to be in somebody's way. I don't want the pressure of that. Completely valid and understandable. If all of your drivers have driver coaches and driver radios, and all the driver coaches are in the same area, it gives us the ability to choreograph a lot of that you can't do at other courses. So if you have a rookie driver out there, it's not uncommon that one of my faster drivers will walk up to that coach. They'll chat for a second. And then the driver coach for the new driver will say, there's a yellow car approaching you. Stay on the left-hand side of the track. He's going to pass you on the right. Brake in the normal spot. Don't get out of the way. Wait until he's clear and then pull in behind him and follow him for 2-3 corners. And then the driver who's approaching always has that level of anxiety. Does he see me? Does he not see me? When his driver coach says to him, I've spoken with the driver in the car you're approaching. He's going to stay left until you turn in. That level of communication and coordination allows us to get a lot more track time with a variety of skill level drivers out there.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really up to your efficiency, and it's also increased the safety, which is right. That's the priority always.
Most important. Yeah, always. 100%. Yeah.
In addition to all that, you've got a racing spec club fleet of BMWs, right?
Correct. So when we started the club, I took a good look at everything that was out there. I've been around the block. I've tried building cars. It's incredibly difficult to start with a street car and build it. Getting the consistency is an incredible challenge. You build 5 of them and then a part is not available and you have to change. And then, one person goes faster. I like this. I like that. So the world of factory manufactured cars was a no-brainer. I love seeing that this has happened. I loved watching the evolution of it. But interestingly, the brands have been quite different. Some still only seem to make enough to support the customer efforts in professional or semi-pro series. Some, and now more, are starting to understand that the amateur environment is quite large. And at the time we started the club, I thought that of all the product on the market, the BMW was the best offering. It does have a couple things that are super unique, and not what people typically think. We are in Miami. So one of the things that the BMW M2 Club Sport Racing has that no other car has is it has a full-time street car air conditioning system in place. Now, it seems like it's just a comfort thing, but in truth, as an amateur driver, the best way to get faster and get better is to accumulate seat time. So the more comfortable the car is, the more chance there is that you're going to spend more time in the car and out there. So that was a no-brainer for us. Also, you're going to make mistakes in cars. You're going to have small bumps. You're going to have small issues. Those cars are very easy to repair. It also had another key element that was a huge driver for me. Much like the European motorcycle system, if you're 18 years old in Europe, you can't go buy a 1,000cc motorcycle. You need to prove your competency at lower levels until you garner some experience, and then you can move up. I wanted to put something in place that was very similar for our driver education system, particularly for the drivers who are minors and those who are under really 20-something years old. I remember my judgment and feelings of invincibility in that age group. So I really want to be careful and mindful of that. And the BMW has what's called a power stick. It has a USB plug that I can pull in and out of the car and change the horsepower. I can flip the master switch off and go between 200 and 400 horsepower like that. So it made it great for our driver education program to start younger drivers on that. The car has been so reliable and so fun to drive that members started buying them as well. It got to the point where I believe I have about half the global production of those cars on site now. And because of that, I was able to hire technicians who are specialists in those cars, and I'm able to stock an inventory of parts for those cars. So if you run one of those cars with us, there's virtually nothing that'll end your day early. We can get those cars turned around if we have issues. They're incredible cars and they're incredibly reliable. Um, we started on day one tracking lap times. And then I post them. I know every member who's been out, every guest, what lap time they've run, what the weather conditions were. And invariably, once you measure lap times enough, the next step is going to be, hey, let's go racing wheel to wheel. So we spent a couple of years developing a group of guys who are ready to race. And then as somebody who's run some spec series before, I quickly realized if you take a bunch of type A personality guys and who have significant budgets, if you don't put up guardrails, you're going to end up with a battle of motors. At a prior motorsport country club I ran, it came to my attention that one of our members had hired a retired Cosworth engine builder from the UK to move into his guest house to build Miata motors for the spec series. And I said, I think we may have gone a little bit away from the spirit and intent of this race series. So we started out on day one saying we want this to be about the driver, not the car. We go to unbelievable lengths to make sure that these cars are equally balanced, but it's been incredible. It has created a series that truly is about the driver. Yeah, I have guys who run in the front, the middle. There is always a race in our series. No matter where you are running in that series, there is always somebody you're running against. And it's a gentleman series. We hire Todd Snyder, who's an IMSA race director. We hire my favorite, my frustrated career that I missed is I really wanted to be a motorsports announcer. So I was able to hire my personal favorite motorsports announcer, Greg Creamer, and I forced him to broadcast with an inexperienced color guy. That's me. But I get to sit there and watch my guys race, and we produce it at an incredibly high level. And it's become one of the cultural centers of the club. I think there's people who attend. I mean, it's not uncommon that we'll have 200, 300 spectators who are just club members and their friends and family to come watch one of our days. And of course, as I mentioned, all of our events are all in. Of course, we always have a DJ and we have a simulator competition. We create a kids village with bounce houses and go-karts and face painting and ice cream. And it's truly a country club, and a country club is based on entertaining the whole family. It's not just a place where mostly guys can come and drive cars.
Yeah, good point. And I like spec series, take the other variables out, the car variables, and let's see who's who. It's fun.
We have a lot of data. I love a good story, but data doesn't lie. There is a direct correlate to the amount of time that you put in, the amount of coaches you hire, the amount of laps you put in, and how the results are in the series. Yes, there's some people who have a little bit more talent and maybe finish a little ahead or a little behind, but over a long enough timeline, the data never lies. And motorsport, especially at the amateur level, is just a game of throughput. That's all. You'll get out of it what you put in.
And I imagine it also makes it more entertaining for the members. I mean, it's something to shoot for, right?
Yeah.
There's some rivalries. There's got to be some pretty funny conversations in the restaurant afterward.
There's some great rivalries. There's some great conversation in the restaurant. There's a lot of what we're calling the young guns who are coming up now. I mean, the ages of the drivers on the grid now, and honestly, how fast they go, how quickly. One thing I've been surprised with is watching the young guys exhibit racecraft well beyond their years based on how many races they have. And the common answer is always, well, I drive the simulator all the time. So here we are right back to that technology. These kids are at home. I send them our course on the simulator and I send them our car. They pound a lot of laps, and that shows as a big advantage. They get out there. They're able to look out the windshield, see somebody else's mistake, and understand how to capitalize on that much faster than those of us who never had that simulator option coming up. I mean, we had Spy Hunter.
Yeah, you're looking down on the car, right? Looking from the bird's eye view.
Yeah.
Aaron, I got to believe you've got some young people there who are looking to turn pro.
I think we do, and I think I have some that actually have a shot at it. I think, though, I also have their parents. And in truth, that they can sit down with a coach and learn that that is not all that glitters is not gold. That is not a super easy lifestyle. I always promote don't put the schooling aside and think this is something you're going to do. Even if you do make it and you do have an incredibly successful career. I mean, what they consider Fernando Alonso now to be the oldest guy in the grid, and he's what, 42?
Something like that. Yeah.
You're going to have a lot of life after motorsport. So I always tell them, use it as the carrot. Um, get the kids through school. Don't stop the focus. And also, much like back in the day, learning golf, even though you loathe the game, was a key skill for business development. Motorsport's becoming the same. So learn how to do this, have it as a skill set. I hear a lot of our members are now inviting guests and renting tracks and doing driving events. And this kind of participation is getting more and more common. So I think I will probably have some that go pro or semi-pro, but I think to a large degree, I'm hopeful that they continue with their education and their lives and their businesses. And this becomes a hobby that's sustainable and fulfills a passion for their whole lives, not a flash in the pan career that ends with a sad story where we all nod, yeah, this may be the cruelest sport in the world, which it may be.
Yeah. No, those are wise words. By the way, earlier we were talking a little bit about Porsches, and you guys have a pretty interesting event called the Flat Six Fest, which has been going on for about 4 years now. And I'm curious about that because you have managed to attract some very prominent Porsche examples through history. Things from the Revs Institute and some singers and all sorts of cool stuff.
I have an incredible events team here. They execute 300-400 events a year at an incredibly high level. That said, that particular event, as probably no great surprise, is my personal passion. That's one that I start planning an hour before the current one ends. I literally start coming up with a theme and I plant seeds all year round. And that is my Xanadu.
That's your baby.
The Flat Six, it's my baby. I absolutely love that event. And the team knows how much I love it. And, we have this great iterative process when we do these events where we sit around a table and we brainstorm. In the first couple meetings, the whole theme is that there's no idea too crazy. We just throw it out there. And what's amazed me is as the team has gotten more and more confident and the event has gained more and more momentum, a higher percentage of the ideas that initially seem crazy end up coming to fruition. And because I'm engaged in that world and because now we have some, I think, provenance and we have a reputation, it's been in the early years, it was a little harder. It was a little bit more of a pitch to pull the cars. And one of my marketing team pointed out something very interesting. He said, the first couple of years people called it, oh, you're a Porsche event at the Concours Club. And just last year and this year, people started to widely just call it the Flat Six Fest. So it's now kind of got its own character. And look, I've already told you what the secret sauce is, and it's super important. That event has to have static cars. It has to have dynamic cars. It has to have food. It has to have music. It has to have beverage. It has to have a degree of culture. So we always pick a theme. This year, I thought a great theme would be honoring Porsche's 19 wins of Le Mans. And again, we like to go all in. So Le Mans is widely known as this incredibly historic place and the touch points of people who visit. There's been a couple that just about everybody tells you about. And I think one of the coolest things about Le Mans is the scrutineering in the downtown village, in that historic square. So I told my team, I want to recreate that. So we work with the local company called Creative Lab Co. Melissa is the founder of that company, and she just kind of makes our dreams come true. So this year she built a full facade for me of downtown Le Mans. I have been doing favors and going back and forth with the guys at the Revs Institute because they're close by and they have Collier Collection, one of the greatest car collections in the world. So when I called and told them that I was building a replica of downtown Le Mans and I needed some Le Mans cars to park in front of it, they were willing to loan me a couple cars that we parked there. And then I started having members come out of the woodwork and go, hey, I never mentioned, but I also have a 911R in my collection that ran in Le Mans this year. So I said, well, bring it out. Then somebody called and said, well, I have a Whittington Brothers 935 that I'd like to race in your vintage.
Bring it on out.
So we had multiple parts. So we had the traditional car show pavilion. And in the pavilion, I was there till I think dawn patrol, we called. I think we started honestly at 3 o'clock in the morning positioning cars. And I really wanted to show the huge diversity of 911, but also kind of how that lineage walked through. So little details like putting the 935 in the paddock, but then next to it, putting the most gaudy, ostentatious Miami DP Porsche with box rockers and the low headlights and the giant fiberglass wing that blocked any chance of seeing anything behind you. But the sheer decadence of it and its homage to the 935. And I also have access to incredible cars that my members loaned me. I mean, I had the brand new Porsche ST, which has been the talk of the town, and I parked it next to one of the originals. I had the 991.1 Speedster, of course, parked next to one of the originals. I wanted those little homage touch points. We built a mini kids village with a carousel to simulate Le Mans, which we thought was just incredible. We have a skid pad, but instead of activating it, I said, I can't believe how many GT3 RSs, GT2 RSs, GT4 RSs. Let's fill the entire skid pad with RSs. And we did everything from original 2.7 liter RSs all the way to the latest, greatest club sport GT stuff and new Manti cars. And that alone was probably more RSs than most car shows had. Then I said, look, I need another theme for an indoor space. I'm inspired by Goodwood, and I'm inspired by their concepting of cultural immersion. And I had the chance to attend one of their events, the Revival, and it stuck with me. It's something I need to go back to again. I just loved it. And, I think the Brits are particularly compliant for that kind of thing. I'm not sure I could get that many Americans to dress up in a costume, but it was the lesson about the cultural immersion. So with all of these new resto mods coming online, I thought it was kind of cool to create what we did. We created something, we called it the Retro Resto Realm. And we took a room. It was in our new events campus space. I have an automotive elevator, so I can bring a car into any space of the building, which is fabulous. My entire team fulfilled my dream and turned the entire room into a 70s theme. I mean, they found a set company that rents out 70s televisions with the curved CRT, and I got to explain to them how the youngest sibling was the remote control back in the day. We brought in 70s furniture. We found a local band that plays 70s music. We decorated an entire wall with vinyl. And then I had an incredible collection. I had singers. I had a KD that came in from Germany. I had one of the original roof resto mods. There's a company called Strott that I think is super underrated. They're actually based down in Colombia. They do these great resto mods, and they had built one for a member on a 964. It was one of the nicest ones I've seen. I invited the Strott car was in there. There's another local gentleman named Brew who's building resto mods off of 993s. I think I had 5 cars in that retro area, and they were a huge range, everything from kind of an entry level car all the way up to, I think Singers really set the bar on those. But I think it was important to me that it's both appealing on the surface for people who aren't particularly car people or Porsche people, and just coming in the space and hearing the music and seeing the cars and the furniture gave them one experience. But I think the people who had a particular interest in those cars had the ability to dig in on a much deeper level. And I think they appreciated the chance. When do you get to see those cars all parked right next to each other? It's not a common thing. So we did that. And then, because it's a family environment, I think one of the fan favorites was, how can you have an homage to Le Mans without a Le Mans start?
Right.
But being a safety guy, I can't do that.
Yeah.
But I did get a hold of 10 electric cars for kids that were like homages to a vintage Grand Prix car. And we got members' kids and we put them in full vintage suits and helmets. And we started them out in pit lane, and they had to run across the pit lane. And we ran a kids Grand Prix. And it was some of the most fun that I've had. In fact, I'm going to show you here. This was from my team. I got to do the track walk, and this is one of my favorite images from the event. This was me on the track walk with my young drivers in their vintage suits.
That's great.
It was one of those experiences that I hope affected them in a way, but it certainly affected me. So that event, is not the only event we produce at that level, but you keyed on it. It's particularly something that I'm passionate about. In past events, we did it in homage to Dakar one year when all the guys got their new Porsche Dakars. I brought in a guy who builds off-road tracks, mountain bike tracks, and dirt, and I built a full rallycross, including a jump. Again, if you need to know why you would want to jump your Dakar, you're probably just not a Concours Club member, right? So we jumped Dakars. We've done some really neat stuff as well. I like that juxtaposition of a car show on the surface for those who are casually interested, but an intense level of detail for those who like it. We did one year, we took every Porsche model with every factory wing, and we parked them all in a circle. But then we hired a professional motorsports journalist, and we did a bunch of research about why the wings, when did they come out, what was the name of the wing. There is a huge debate about what's the whale tail versus a T-tray.
Right.
Very interestingly, only the Northeast has one opinion, and the rest of the world, it's the complete opposite. But we basically put on the cars, on these key design elements, little barcodes. If you scan the barcode on your phone, it would play music from that year for you. And you could do a little read on what is the detail we're looking at. Like on the 72, we had a sticker pointing at the oil door. And we explained it's the only model year. If you ever see this door here, it's the only model year that it's a level of minutia that your average casual participant about probably doesn't care at all about. But if you're a hardcore person and you want to dedicate the time, it's there for you. It's just not in your face.
Aaron, I got to get down there to this event next time.
You are on the invite list for the next event. You will love it. We're still not quite sure on a theme. The Le Mans one it's going to be really hard to top, but we have some good ideas.
Aaron Weiss, president of the Concours Club, down in Metro Miami, Opelika, Florida, to be exact, at the Opelika Executive Airport. And the website is theconcoursclub.com. Aaron, thanks so much. And I'll have links in the show notes for people who want to learn more, but I just really appreciate you coming on the show.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. There's even more for you over on Instagram and YouTube, so check it out. And go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage to become a patron of the show. I'll see you back here on Wednesday, April 16th for more of the people and stories behind the machines. So until then, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.